involved on an ongoing basis, and you have constant communication, then you're getting buy-in from all different levels and parts of the organization. So you're not just saying, you will do this, but it's we will do this. This is our goal. How do we get there? It's almost, I like to say, like, a big football fan, it's like being a quarterback of a team. You have to know the strengths and weaknesses of all the players and make sure everybody sees the end zone. We have the same goal. How are we going to get there? Let's get there on time, on budget, and do it successfully.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Over a Pint, the most popular business podcast in Milwaukee. For those of you who are joining for the first time, welcome. This pod focuses on the world of marketing, and it's told through the eyes of Kurt and I. We're seasoned veterans, but also the guests that we bring on. We're trying to deliver real-world practical insights. Want to stay away from theory here and really get into the meat and potato of what's going on in marketing, because this is a space that is continually changing. It's continually evolving, and it's hard to stay on top of it. That's what we're trying to do for all of you who are listening. Joining me, as always, my man, Mr. Kurt Lingle, Vice President of Celtic Advertising, full-service agency located here in Milwaukee. You got me, Pat McGovern, Director of Sales and Marketing over at Acedia. I'm also located in Milwaukee. Kurt and I, our shops are about 4 or 5 blocks apart. We're basically neighbors.
We live close together too.
We live close together.
Yeah.
Today, the topic is brand. And Kurt, it's fair to say this is one of our faves, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Branding
Love
is a huge topic. And I'm going to say this too. I think still is important as it is. I think just a lot of people, a lot of organizations just get it wrong. Setting us straight is Sheryl Dubitsky. Sheryl is a big time brand person. Listen to some of the brands in her portfolio that she's worked on. Hamilton Jewelers, a little company called Waterford. Oh, and this other little company called Bed Bath & Beyond. This is going to be crazy interesting. I'm really excited she's here to talk to us about brand, her insights, her takeaways. Let's get this going. Sheryl, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. Super excited to be here. I know it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm quite honored to be part of the roster of guests that you've had. So I hope I can live up to some of them, because they're pretty awesome.
Well, thank you. And you are going to be awesome. And your resume is just, it's really impressive. And I think what's appealing to you and the work that you've done to me is your path into marketing wasn't like a straight line. I mean, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into marketing?
Sure. Yeah, I would say it definitely was not a straight line. I'm not a classically trained marketer, so you won't hear me throwing buzzwords, a string of words in a sentence of buzzwords, which leaves people going, huh? What did she say? So for me, I went to Rutgers University. Live here in New Jersey.
Yeah.
Wasn't born here, but pretty much raised here. Went to Rutgers, got a degree in art history, decided I didn't really want to work in a gallery or a back room of a museum. And I loved product, sort of brought up in a world of retail. Both my parents were retail managers, so that was sort of in the blood. As well as the jewelry industry. So I was like, well, I like pretty things. I'm going to start working in a jewelry store. And, the goal was to get into the wholesale side of things. So I knew how hard it is to be in retail. So, and lo and behold, that's where I ended up spending my career in retail, both on the retailer side of things and the brand side of things. And really spent most of my time in the world of luxury goods, working in consumer retail sales, and then shifting into B2B and corporate sales, then adding on wholesale sales, trade sales within, the interior design world and hospitality. And then really just by the sheer luck, I guess, of the network of people that I'd met and
Yeah.
worked with through the year, ended up on the brand marketing and branding side of of the aisle, so to speak. So, at Waterford, I was really brand director, but responsible for, I'd say, true branding, including the look and feel of the brand, but also making sure the product, from product concept to product launch, was being done on time and on budget and meeting sales goals, etc. And when I went to Bed Bath, and it was sort of an interesting thing. I mean, Bed Bath had been a customer, so, and I was a customer of Bed Bath at that time, who wasn't.
Yeah, right.
So, there I really moved into, I was on the brand team. I was there for 4.5 years. And I'd say because it was such a, highly matrixed organization with a very, very strong merchant-led organization, I spent less time on the product side, but what it enabled me to do was spend so much more time on the digital and integrated, marketing part of branding. So, it just gave me a full, I'd say, rounded experience in brand and brand marketing. So,
Interesting. Very cool. So let's kind of dig in, Sheryl, and
Okay.
just share with us. I mean, it seems like once you got over from what if I'm listening correctly, from what I'm hearing, is once you get to Waterford, that's when the kind of you really started going deep into the brand. Yes.
Yes, definitely, because that was my primary responsibility. But I will say that I had worked for smaller companies, luxury brands like Steuben Glass. I worked there for almost 11 years. I worked at Lalique, the North America. I worked, and then, so I worked at Asprey and Garrard when they launched on Fifth Avenue here in New York. So I worked with brands that were sort of small, leanly run. So even though I was primarily responsible for delivering on sales, I also had to craft my own marketing and branding messaging in order to, have a lead generation and then, achieve my sales goals. So, so I was really doing. So I always said I had a team of me, myself, and I I was really doing sales and marketing.
Right.
Because I had to drive my own lead generation programs and, to achieve my goals.
So Sheryl, from talk to us a little bit about then how these brands approached branding. Like, how did they think about the brand? How did they want it to promote it? Because, so often brand is important. And when people are sitting around a conference room, and Kurt, I'm sure you've experienced this too, right?
Mhm.
Brand's the most important thing. We're not going to sacrifice the brand. The brand is is everything
Handle
for
me
us.
with
This is what's
care.
going to, right? We're going to handle this with care. Oh, yep. Except when sales are down, get me that 40% off thing. It's like, whoa, hold on. I thought the brand was important. Like you always have that yin and yang, and that's important, right? I'm curious. You must have had some very interesting conversations, approaches. Share with us what you can about how these brands that you worked with, how they approached it, and what were the differences, maybe in some of the commonalities.
Sure. Well, I think of promotion as separate from brand. I think if you have a clear brand vision and purpose, and you are consistently communicating those across every platform that you are using to reach customers. So therefore, everything the customer sees, hears, feels, thinks, and touches and buys, the experience, all of that, if all of that is laddering up and consistently living that very clearly crafted and authentic brand message and value, then promotion should not really challenge that so much. A promotion is something to just get people in the door or move inventory. But if you're true to the, if you're true to the voice and the values, it should be fine.
If I could jump in, first of all, I loved how you answered that question, Sheryl. I think you were spot on. And Pat, I know exactly where you were going with this, in terms of, how people perceive brand, and they confuse it with marketing and sales. And Sheryl, you hit it on the head. It's like, no, promotion's different. I love it. And I have a lot of respect for companies and practitioners like yourself who understand. It's like, no, listen, the brand, we got to understand what this brand is all about. You said it best, the voice, the vision, the persona. Let's start there. Let's figure that out, because everything that trickles down after that kind of stems, how we speak in the channels, how we talk to our customers, how do we talk internally. That's all a part of the brand. It's like a body. It's just anatomy. It just kind of, you have to start there. I love the answer. You're spot on.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, now I've been doing consulting and working with smaller businesses or smaller brands. And very often I see that people start with a product, right? Or a service, or they start with what they want to be or who they are, but they haven't done the foundational work to have a long-term strategy that supports clearly who they are, who their customer is, and how they want to create this community.
Yeah, and you know what, Sheryl, too, just to kind of, you've touched big brands, small brands, and I agree. It doesn't matter the size of the company. Really, in theory, you should be thinking of it that way. Nonprofit, for profit. And Pat, we had a nonprofit on yesterday, and that came up, and it's like, I don't care if nonprofit's next to the name. At the end of the day, they're still responsible for a brand. And that's so important. And it's the same, they have the same challenges, and they should have the same type of focus. So no, that's good stuff.
Yeah.
Sheryl, you mentioned something though when you were responding, and you said, you talked about they may not have done the foundational work.
Right.
Talk to us a little bit about the foundational work. When you come in and you start consulting, and even, go back in your past when you were working with whomever, it doesn't matter. What does that mean? What are you talking about? What's the foundational pieces that you have to put, an organization through, right?
Yeah. Well, I can talk about it. To give you an example, when I was at Waterford, we had a designer brand, Monique Lullier, and it was through one of the other brands that the company owned, which was Royal Dalton, which was sort of an everyday brand.
Sure.
But it didn't really fit who she was as a designer. So it was shifted to Waterford. My responsibility was to shift that and really, like soup to nuts, look at all the product and figure out what to rationalize and, get rid of, because it didn't fit who the brand was. So we needed to define who the brand was, who was the target audience, which was primarily bridal and bridal registries that are top customers. And then how to really, I hate to use the word tagline. Not every brand needs a tagline, but in this case, you need a statement, right, about who the brand is. So so I had to craft that statement, and then everything else has to tie up to that and support that, who that brand is. And then all the communication strategies have to go to where that customer who you've identified, where they are, right? So it's sort of like building the story, building the assets to, here I'll use classically trained, some buzzwords, to drive upper funnel awareness.
Sure.
Learn from that, and those learnings inform the activations that drive mid to lower funnel sales. And so it's sort of a full story, so to speak.
Sheryl, when you would be building a brand, or kind of going through your audit process and the foundational work that you were doing, how much would you incorporate just consumer feedback into that, either via surveys and or focus groups?
Gosh, I think data is key to understanding who the customer is, what's selling. Like if you're doing, basically looking at your, like, so going back to that example of Monique and, looking at what was selling, what wasn't selling, that's one story. And then looking at the competitive set, where's our white space from a product standpoint?
Yeah.
Customer data is crucial. I can't say that I've been lucky to work with any company large enough to have big enough budget to do customer focus groups. We did do a few at Bed Bath for Beyond for furniture, and quite frankly, it didn't tell us that much that we didn't already know.
Sure.
It just provided some data to support the presentation to upper management to say, here, we're saying this, but now we have data to prove it out. And now we can, get the funding to move forward to address the issues that were brought up.
Totally. I totally think that a lot of times research is just a confirmation of things that we know, but let's confirm that for sure.
Agree.
And that's totally okay, right?
With the audit, when you're walking through this process with either for a brand that you're, you're guiding, or it's a consulting, it's like, it's interesting, Sheryl, personality wise, it's like, at the end of the day, it's like you have a personality. You are who you are, Pat. You have a personality. You are who you are, and I am. It's hard to change. Sheryl, in your career, have you come across situations where you go through the audit, you're trying to identify the persona, the personality, the voice, and you've got either it's the company you're with or you're consulting, and you're like, here's who you are, and they're like, well, I don't want to be that. I'm like, well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you don't want to. I mean, talk through that, because we've experienced that. When we walk through those, and it's like, the worst thing you can do is be something you're not.
Agree.
Obviously, I can fix things about me that maybe aren't good in my traits, but talk about that where it's like, here's who you are.
Well,
you gotta be honest, authentic.
I think if you have, and I think that shows up more if you are, let's say, doing a collaboration with a designer or, a celebrity or a person, actual individual, or a brand or a company that is run and founded by an individual who is emotionally attached, right? And so I think that it sort of is an eye-opener to, you thought you wanted to go straight, but at some point the path veered to the right or to the left. But the data will tell you the truth, right? So you can either choose to follow that and grow that, or if you want to retrench and say, well, I don't want to be that, then that's a completely different story. Then you have to back up and figure out the opportunity, right? Is, if you want to be X, not Y, is it worthwhile? What's the size of the prize? What's it going to cost me to get there? If I retrench and change, how I'm talking about my brand, how I'm, the product I've got, everything else that supports that, communications, materials, how many of your current customers you're going to lose. I mean, you could do it if you want, but then you're crafting a new business. So I think it's sort of black and white.
Sure, let's pivot a little bit. And I want to talk about, kind of compare and contrast a little bit. So, you talked about some of the brands that you were working with, and you said they're fairly small brands. And so I'm, small. So that means you've got a fairly tight budget you've got to work with. Waterford seems a little bit, it's definitely a step up. And that seems like an organization that is, from the outside looking in, very focused on brand and their heritage, and telling that kind of story and reinforcing that story and so forth. Then you make the move to Bed Bath and Beyond. And on one hand, you have probably a pretty decent budget, but now you're dealing with a big organization, which means its own set of challenges. And so just talk to us about a little bit about that position, what you did there, and some of the learnings you took away from that.
Sure. I think my background in selling into businesses at the executive level gave me experience and a comfort level of dealing with, anybody within an organization. So, yeah, I'd say, there are definitely issues when you're dealing in an organization like a national retailer such as Bed Bath, because it's very highly siloed, highly matrixed. You've got a lot of stakeholders, right? So I think what I learned were some of the biggest successes that I had there were making sure to work cross-functionally, creating steering committees, sort of following the learnings of like IT, what they have with using an agile methodology. I think a lot of those techniques work. So if you have the proper stakeholders involved on an ongoing basis, and you have constant communication, then you're getting buy-in from all different levels and parts of the organization. So you're not just saying, you will do this, but it's we will do this. This is our goal. How do we get there? It's almost, I like to say, like, a big football fan, it's like being a quarterback of a team. You have to know the strengths and weaknesses of all the players and make sure everybody sees the end zone. We have the same goal. How are we going to get there? Let's get there on time, on budget, and do it successfully. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think
yeah,
that's what I've learned.
And then talk about the other thing that's really, really interesting with your background is the amount of product launches that you have been involved with. And again, some people may have one or two. You have quite a bit in your background. Again, what have you learned from some of those launches, and how do you do it successfully? And boy, I wish I had another kick at that can again, because this is what I would have done differently.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can tell you the ones that failed. So, it's a numbers game, but, the launches that did not go well, I think always came down to product, believe it or not. So even though we had, let's say, a concept that we thought was checking all the boxes, it had a cute name, it had, some sort of value-driven message that we thought would appeal to a broad customer base. But if the product was not good, the product quality was not good, or the price value proposition was not good, and the customer didn't understand it or thought it was overpriced, or, just like looked at it and went, why? Combine, if you have logistic issues, that just destroys the whole thing. So I'd say sometimes when you pick a theme or a brand or a product or a collaboration, you say, wow, this collaboration is going to, I'm definitely going to do this. We're going to put money behind it because it's going to go directly towards this customer target group that we're just, not doing enough with. It just, it doesn't work. And on the other hand, I think when you have, sometimes you need the leisure of time to really methodically get everything, all your ducks in a row. You need to, you have great product, you have great designs, you have a strong brand, you have strong brand partners, either a brand owner or a designer or a manufacturer that's going to work with you, not against you, and help support the launch in totality. And then, when you can effectively, get it into a store and get it online, and everybody's working together to make it happen, and you hit your targets, like I said, you get into the end zone, then the customer gets it, they see it, they understand it. And I think, B&Willow was one of the largest owned brands that I launched at Bed Bath, and it was just timely because it was a clear aesthetic. It was a design aesthetic. The farm sort of modern farmhouse aesthetic. And it was across, product for every room in the home. And that was the tagline that we wrote, be in Willow for every room in your home. And that's indoors and outdoors. We made a clear, photo shoot that shot assets to support that message. And then everything else we did, from merchandising in the store, merchandising on the site, all the campaign, social media campaigns, influencer campaigns, everything laddered up to that very clear statement from an aesthetic standpoint and a messaging standpoint. And it did exceptionally well. So I think that's where I learned, to have that clarity of message that's supported by every aspect of the brand just, makes it a lot easier to succeed.
Sure. With something like that launch, was it always the plan to launch, like, we're going to be launching product for every room in the house at once? Like, when it hits the shelves, I mean, it's going to be soup to nuts. Or were you just like, hey, let's focus on the kitchen first, and then we'll,
Well, we did know that we were focusing on the core, which was bed, bath, and decor. So we didn't do outdoor. So, it was a January, February launch. So it's when people refresh their linens for spring. So it was a focus on the top selling categories, of course, like bedding, bath, and then home decor. And then pursuant to that was launches that were associated with either the time of year, so harvest, holiday, and then the following year, we moved into outdoor, and then furniture, longer lead, takes longer time to develop. So
Sheryl, as
measured.
You bring so much experience to the table. So obviously you have an eye for what's going on around you in the industry. And I'm always curious, and Pat, you and I were talking a little bit about this before Sheryl popped on. You were like, hey, did you see this in Ad Age and this and that? We're constantly looking at what's going on and evaluating, and sure, it's subjective, it's an opinion. Mm-hmm. As you look at other brands and you see, outside of things that you've touched, but you're just looking at it as an outsider with a lot of experience, what brands are you seeing out there where, I'll make it easy for you. I'm not gonna ever have you critique, but I'll keep it positive. Name a couple brands that you look at and say, you know what, I like what they're doing. They're on point. Even if you don't use their product, you're just, from a messaging perspective, from a brand perspective, you're like, you know what? Yeah, they own who they are. It seems authentic. I like what they're doing. Can you maybe share a couple examples that you can think of?
There's so many, but I would say one of the brands that I find fascinating right now, how they've taken a heritage brand and turned it into something cool and very now, is Gucci. There are a couple other, I think, luxury brands that are doing the same thing, but they are, they're in the metaverse. They're just doing collaborations from a design perspective and, communications perspective that is driving excitement for a Gen Z, Gen X, millennial, customer. Now, this is a brand that's, their grandmother probably had a pair of Gucci shoes in a handbag, and they want it because vintage is and reuse is so important. But they've been able to, I think, communicate excitement and newness at a very high level, which helps drive that mid-level, mass, business. So I think that's super exciting. And I think to me, there's all of like 1,000,001 direct-to-consumer brands. And like a year ago, I think there was a discussion of the brands, like so much of them look the same. So I think some of them do really well. There's so many, I can't even go into them, but I think some other brands I like is Restoration Hardware. Maybe I like luxury brands, but RH, they'll continue, I think, forever be called RH, but also Restoration Hardware. Here's a brand that, like, where they were and where they are now, they are so crystal clear about who they are. And it shows through on their products. It shows through on their expansion into hotels. You can rent a yacht. You can, book a flight on their planes. Like, who would have thought? It's just bizarre. So I think that I find so inspiring. And, Coach is another brand that I think is, revamped and is doing super exciting things. So, and actually another one I think that I found really cool was, I think it's Children's Place. So any of the brands that are going into the metaverse and Roblox and the other sort of NFT area, that fascinates me. Whether it's Target, who launched a T-shirt that you could buy in real life and wear it, and then buy the NFT for your avatar, like something as simple as that. And to design, luxury brands creating full experiences in the metaverse, fast food, opening up fast food. So your avatar can buy a burger and, while you're gaming, and at the same time, it triggers an order that gets delivered to your house. Like, that to me just blows my mind. So I sort of answered it, but I also like.
You did. No, you definitely answered it for sure.
Yeah, and that spins us into this question. And Sheryl, when you and I first met a while back, I remember us talking about this, and I just want to bring it back, and this will be a nice tie-in. And then you were just talking about some of the classic brands, some traditional brands, Gucci, and I would agree with you. I think they've done a very, very good job of staying relevant and contemporary for such a classic name, right? An iconic brand. In your view, Sheryl, is it easier to rebrand a product, or is it easier to start new and create the brand? And the big question is, and whatever you're going to answer, why do you say that?
Okay. I would say that it's easier to launch a brand than it is to rebrand. And that's because when you're launching a brand, you're controlling everything from the beginning, right? And you're building. And as long as you're following the steps, it's exciting. You're taught. I mean, the hard part about it is you have to reach new customers, right? And you have to build awareness and build sales. So, but when you're rebranding, I think it's harder because unless you have clarity as to why you're rebranding, so many brands fail, right? So, if you're rebranding because, let's say, you're the Washington Redskins and it's politically incorrect and you need to have a new name, I don't even remember the new name, but they've taken 2 years to do it. I don't think they're going to lose fans, but they had to do that. Aunt Jemima had to rebrand. I don't even know what the new name is. They changed the logo. They changed the label. It looks pretty much the same. So I think they're not going to lose customers.
Sure.
But I think you run the risk of alienating your customer base if you're not doing it for the right reason or, in the right manner. And I think there's a difference between an overhaul or an update, right? So if you're BMW and you just changed the logo because you got rid of some colors because, having 2 colors instead of 3 and gradation looks better in digital, that's different. Like, the only people who paid attention to that were people like us or, graphic designers. The buyer doesn't notice, shift in a messaging, as long as it's true to the brand, those are just evolutions. And I think brands are constantly evolving, but overhauls are really hard to do.
Interesting. Sheryl, you've spent a lot of time in the branding space. You continue to work in it very aggressively. Talk to us, and you touched on this a little bit, but Where's branding going? Where are some trends that you are seeing? Where's the puck kind of moving toward in this space?
I think things will continue to stay digital. Digital first is not something you say, it just is.
Right.
I think there are more and more platforms. So in some ways it's more fractured, but there are more and more platforms that allow you to be targeted to building to specific communities, right? So like Pinterest just started a new app called Shuffles, and it's fun, but it's completely visual based, right? So it's about art and design. It's not about, like a regular Pinterest. So there will continue to be, I think, these very community based platforms. And I think there are sort of two things that I think are going to become more and more important. And it's driven by Gen Z as they get older and as their spending power becomes the driver of everything. And it's this idea of conscious consumerism and making very thoughtful choices about where they spend money. And so a brand and a retailer, however you want to call it, has to be really very authentically clear about their brand values. And, so it's aligning to that customer and those individuals' beliefs. I think, the circular economy, is going to become part of every day. And greenwashing is not going to fly. So, because I think these consumers, they can see right through you.
When you are talking to potential clients of yours and having that conversation, and they're trying to maybe you're talking to them about where their brand needs to go, how receptive are most of the people that you're talking to? Do you find this is an easy sell for you, or are people still trying to wrap their heads around the full extent of how I should go about this? Where's that at?
Well, I think it depends on how far the brand has gone and what their needs are. If you're a small brand and you have a very limited budget, you have to look at where you are, where your customer is, where you want to go, and you have to be really, sort of specific. And I think you still have to, follow this test and learn approach. So, the classic, like, oh, I'm going to send out emails and then I'm going to, do X amount on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn or whatever. I think you have to just be really thoughtful about this. And I think, if you were dealing with a small company that doesn't have a lot of bandwidth, or they haven't been talking about that, no one's told them that, and so they haven't thought about it. Yeah, there's definitely a learning curve, and some people are open to it, and some people aren't, because they're just not there yet.
Yeah, yeah. The space is, as we said in the beginning of this, is changing so rapidly, and it's hard to stay on top of things. So Sheryl, you're in the middle of it, and you're out in the East Coast, so you're seeing a lot of changes happening way before simple folk like Kurt and I see the big changes happening. How do you stay on top of stuff? What do you do to consume? What materials are you consuming? What are you reading? What are you watching in order to stay abreast of as to what's going on a daily basis?
I'd say the one good thing about COVID was it gave me the luxury of time to actually spend a bit more time looking beyond the traditional, places I would go to for news. And I actually think that digitally there's great aggregators of news. So, I've always been a voracious reader across lots of different, areas of business. So, I just, try and read as much as I can. I can plug a few things. I like the whole Morning Brew team. I think all of their newsletters are fabulous. I like retail dive. So, I look at retail, I look at marketing, I look at the design world, and follow a few people on the design world. I still keep my finger on what's going on in the world of jewelry. And I probably get, 300 to 400 emails a day from different brands, and follow quite a few on Instagram, and not so much Facebook because it doesn't interest me. But I also look at new places like Discourse, where there are communities on Discourse where people are communicating differently. So, and then I lean on my nieces and nephews I'm always asking them, so what do you do? Where do you get your news? Have you ever done this?
That's hilarious. That's hilarious.
So I'm always asking other people what they're doing. So, yeah. And, shopping the stores is always important. You got to get out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sheryl, I always like to ask this question. And as you look at your career, and obviously there's, you've had a lot of experiences. Is there any point where you would, if you could, and the answer could be like, no, however you want to answer, you want to do it, you would love to have another crack at something, a do-over, as we look back and it's like, you know what? I wish I could do a do-over on this day or for this project or whatever, or take another crack. Is there something you look back and like, just curious.
Well, it's interesting because when I worked at Steuben, it was a heritage brand, and it was owned by Corning for various reasons. It was sold, it had new ownership, it sort of veered left, and then was brought back into the fold. I still think some of these heritage brands that I worked at, like Steuben, if we could only get, me and people I've worked with, friends I know that are passionate about these brands, if we could only get our hand on that now, get our hands on that, I still think there's potential for bringing back to life some of these old heritage brands. But, it's probably not going to happen because of various reasons. But I will say I'm very lucky to have worked with some of the best brands and some of the best customers in the world, and some of the best teams. I'm still very, very close friends with our Steuben crew and people I've worked with throughout the year. So, which is really good. So, I think that,
Fantastic background, Sheryl, and thank you for sharing just a little bit of your knowledge and what you've been through and talking to us. This is awesome. We are so excited. Kurt, what did we forget? We forgot to talk about over a pint. What do we have?
Well,
Sheryl, what do you got?
To ask me what I'm drinking.
Yeah, what do you got?
I know, Pat. I didn't want to say anything. I was like, Pat, you missed the most important question.
I know. I'm like
How
halfway through this. I'm like, oh my God. So, all right, enough with the brand talk conversation. Sheryl, what do you got?
I'm going to talk about a brand. So this is Cape May Brewing Company. It's called Coastal Evacuation. It's a double IPA. And, Cape May, New Jersey, we were talking before about how New Jersey is a beautiful state. It's got one of the longest beach, shorelines, right? Cape May is the southernmost tip of New Jersey. And it's a beautiful beach area. And Cape May Brewing, they've been in business, I looked up, since 2011. And they're fun. So they've increased their distribution so you can actually get it outside of Cape May now. They're in Joe Canal. Plug for Joe Canal. And it's just a really good beer. And I was looking up trying to figure out how many breweries there are in New Jersey right now. It's over 100. It seems like it's more than that. Every town has a brewery.
Yeah.
So it's sort of fun to, test them out and see the growth of that business.
Kurt, you're plugged into this.
That was a great plug, actually. That was one of the better plugs we've had for a beer.
I've actually been on that coastal evacuation route because I've been in Cape May when a hurricane was hitting and had to evacuate. And I will tell you that is what was normally a 2.5, 2 hour drive was a 4.5 hour drive. So
I was going to ask this to Kurt, but maybe Sheryl, and there's no reason. I mean, you might know this too. Guys, I don't. Makes it a double IPA? What is, I don't think I've ever heard of that
I
before.
have no idea. Let me read it. Let's see.
Kurt, any?
Tastes doubly good.
It's big
Okay.
and bold as hurricane season itself.
All right.
Yeah.
I don't know. You'd have to go ask them. They have.
Kurt, we're going to have to have a road trip out there to figure it out then.
Yeah, we've had enough brewers on too.
What do you got, my man? What do you want to plug today?
We had, this is Biergarten. It's a pretzel beer. So Sheryl, this is, we had the Milwaukee Pretzel Company on, we interviewed them a couple days ago, and they did a joint beer with a local brewery here in Milwaukee, Good City Brewing, Milwaukee Pretzel Company. They put all their goodness together and made a beer.
Yeah, that's a great brand collaboration.
It is. And Pat dropped off 2 on my porch because we had them on. So they're gone already. So I had to go out and buy some, Pat. So this is where this came from. It's good beer.
Yeah, I've got the same thing. It's delicious.
Yeah, it's good.
And I can't. There we go, a little bit better. Okay.
Well, it's sort of like putting, peanut butter and chocolate together.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a great combination, and it's fantastic. Sheryl, you have the last word on things. How do people find out more about you? If people want to reach out and contact you and get some more insights on your branding, maybe potential collaborations with you, how do they find you? You got it.
I guess best way is on LinkedIn. I'm not following my own advice very well, so I don't have a website yet. But LinkedIn is a good way. And my email address, I will say it, but I have to spell it because my last name is so challenging for so many people. But it's S for Sheryl, K, my middle name, and then last name Dubitsky @gmail.com. So pretty straightforward.
We'll put a post copy too.
Yep, we got that in the show notes for you. Sheryl, thanks again for being on the podcast. Really appreciate your time.
That was fun.
Yeah.
Cheers, everybody. Have a great day.
And I'm looking forward to your 100th episode.
All right.
When I'm going to interview you.
Oh, here we go. By the way, before we close off, can I just say, Sheryl, thank you for being nice to us. Pat, I wasn't quite sure because we did a pre-production call with Sheryl yesterday, and I was like, she might just throw a few hard questions our way, but you were very nice, but you're probably saving them for the 100th, so we appreciate that. Thank you, Sheryl. Cheers, everyone.